What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we return with Leila Abdul-Rauf. Thank you so much for coming back onto the show. Great to be able to speak with you again and being able to discuss everything under the sun with you.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be back.
Yeah, the last time I spoke to you it was in a Ionophore interview. But the first time I've ever heard your music was Diminution back from 2018. I have been, keeping in touch and looking at, all the other material that you've put out since then. But this time we got Calls from a Seething Edge, which comes out this Friday, I believe. So, was there sort of like a preconceived vision of what Calls from a Seething Edge was supposed to be like? Was it continuing in a similar vein of Diminution or Fantasi or whatnot have you?
I definitely want to do something different from Diminution and all of the previous work. So this is album 5 in the catalog, and it was time for a change. It was time to just like kind of throw out all the old templates in a way. I think I did something really different, but my partner listened to it and thought it was still like relevant to the previous, there was still a connection, like there's still a sound that's mine, but it's like no matter how hard we try to do something different, it still sounds like us, right?
Yeah, it's always like there's always a damned if you do, damned if you don't. I love that you talked on the topic of change, because change is, a real important subject matter. But I was, because you never want to abandon who you previously were. You can't change where you've come from. You can't change the past or anything like that. But at the same time, while you don't want to abandon yourself, you also want to grow, and you got to develop. The "kill your darlings" famous saying with creating art. So did you feel like you were walking a fine line with the creating of this new album?
Definitely. Like I knew I wanted to be bigger, louder, more complex. I wanted a bunch of guest musicians. I mean, I've had guests on previous albums, but never this many and never featured so heavily. So it was almost like putting a band together. Not quite, but almost. And just like I didn't know sonically what direction I was going to go in when I started. I had more of a philosophical concept to the album. I knew it was a response to all the conflict going on out there. And I knew that conceptually I wanted this album to be more facing outward and not as solitary and introspective as the previous work. Like it was like I have all this stuff pent up inside me and I'm just like throwing it out there. And that's the whole feel that I wanted to give to this. Something with a little more aggression, more rhythm. There's drums. I learned some drum programming. Just delving into spaces I haven't gone before, which is always a risk. Especially like this late in my discography, it was definitely taking a risk, but I think the response has been pretty good so far from what I've heard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, do you feel that maybe because you were looking more outward and it was less introspective, that maybe this album as a result resonates with you on a different level as well? Does it feel like maybe your interpretation of it or your experience with it has a different connection? Or being, in the end, music is music, it's still coming from you, you have the same sort of connection with it?
Yeah, well, I definitely connect with it very differently. Like it's a type of music that I could put more oomph into it. When I perform it live, even when I was making it, it was like, how can I make this sound even bigger? Like, what can I do? I even hired someone to mix it, which I've never done on previous solo albums or any of the Ionophore albums. They were all mixed by us. So this is the first time I've gone outside because there were just so many tracks, and I knew I just couldn't do it justice if I tried to do it myself. So that took a lot of trust, and that was a risk, but it was the best decision in the end. And yeah, I mean,
You mentioned that it did sort of feel like putting a band together for the making of this album. Did it at all maybe like creatively feel more in line with Vastum or Ionophore or any of the other projects you've been involved with? Like, did it almost kind of have that sort of creative mindset behind it?
yes and no. I mean, ionophore is like a totally is like its own thing where we all just like it's so collaborative. Whereas with this, there was definitely a little bit of collaboration, but I was also writing people's parts too. So it was really like almost more like a orchestra composer than Vastum. Vastum's semi-collaborative, not entirely, but this was more like I put a string quartet together, and these are the parts I wanted, with the exception of like the drum parts and Derek Vella from Two Mold, his guitar solo. He wrote his own part, which was great because like Derek and Sam, like I've collaborated with them before. I totally trust their knowledge and intuition around what I do, and to make it really fit. So I just kind of gave them sort of free, like carte blanche to do what they wanted with their parts. But then there was the string quartet. It was like Ryan, Vincent, and Ed, and Gregory, and the parts. All of those parts were composed note for note, and so that was interesting. I mean, because obviously it can start out that way, but then as things progress, it affects like the rest of the album. So as soon as I heard Vincent's cello on one song, I was like, well, I'd love for you to do it on this other song too. And then, yeah, so I kind of just, it kept evolving as the recording went on.
There was so much like forethought and like a lot of craftsmanship where like you were again putting things together and kind of like standing outward and having all these arrangements. I felt like with albums such as Diminution or your previous works that like it captures very much of a moment where it almost has that sort of essence of organized chaos. Did it maybe feel a little less more of like trying to capture a moment and sort of like less it being that it seemed like it was very focused, if you will, like very, very like structured, if you will. I'm not saying that there isn't structure with the other albums, but like it's so atmospheric that it feels like it takes me through multiple directions, whereas here it feels like very composed, like it has to be this sort of way.
For sure. I added a lot more like traditional folk elements that I haven't delved into before, which gives it more of this structured feel. It's sort of it's more composed, less stream of consciousness. It's rhythmic, there's like, there's hand drums, there are drum machines and all of that. And that sort of kind of reins everything in a little bit more than when you're just working with these drones and textures that kind of, all blend and in and out of each other, and it's a different experience, and for live performance it's going to be a lot more challenging than the past.
Are you being that it's like putting a band together at this point, like is it going to feel like again maybe more of a Vastum show or something like that when playing that stuff live?
I wouldn't go that far because there's no way I'm going to have all these guests playing live with me. I might have like one or two, like at different times. And like I just did this show at the Arab American National Museum a few weeks ago, and I did it all myself. I used a lot of backing tracks, but I changed a lot of and this is what I usually do when I try to interpret the album versions live. I totally restructure the songs. I write new parts. Like there's a vocal part that doesn't exist on the album that I wrote specifically for the live version. There's a trumpet part where the viola solo used to be, and it's a totally different thing. So it's like I'll have live versions and I'll keep changing the live versions at will. So the cool thing about being a solo artist is you could just do this on the dime and not have to consult anyone and just make it a different thing every time. play with a person or two, or just do it alone and, you know, change it up. So it's pretty fun.
Do you almost feel like that the live process is very similar to the songwriting process in that regard, since you seems like you're always rediscovering the songs that you play?
Totally. Like, yeah. And I'm thinking about the spaces I play. Like this set of songs would fit with this space, but not in this other space, and vice versa. Or maybe interpreting the song in this particular way with this instrument will work better for this space. Or, you know, maybe I'll have dancers performing with me sometime. We'll see. I don't know.
That'll be amazing. That would be incredible. And I could definitely see that being pulled off. I'd like to almost see like a whole performance arts setting behind it. Like, you know, we've seen a lot of like performance art and modern art, and sometimes I think it's like incredible. Sometimes I think it's like kind of almost a failure in some other aspects. I think with the music that you're able to create, you could create a whole atmosphere. I think you could create a whole immersion in that regard.
Yeah, like that's definitely the direction I want to keep taking things in. Like, just, I've been using visuals since the beginning, but I want to like go from like 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional to, you know, maybe adding more people if the budget allows, because that's a big factor too, and just making it more of a multimedia thing and not be restricted by just the audio aspect or the flat screen or whatever.
Does the visual aspect of your music, or the vision rather, does that kind of happen simultaneously with the songs in a way, or do you get more of a vision maybe after like the album's completed and you have kind of like a song order and presentation ready?
Both. Like I have a vision almost before I even start. Like there's some image I have in my head. Like with this album, it was, you know, the edge of a knife's blade and walking on it, and you know, life and death being on either side of it, or the spirit and concrete world, or whatever dichotomy you want to like draw up in your mind. That was, you know, the edge, the seething edge that sort of came to mind. So there was sort of this initial vision, and then as I'm writing the songs, you know, different images and colors come to mind as I'm writing. Like that's such a big part of this process. And then more things will come up later too. Like once I'm building the live set, there'll be other images so it's the constant process.
Do you have the synesthesia that they say when you hear certain notes, you see certain colors?
Maybe a little, like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
But they keep changing.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I think like, that's why I've always sort of like disputed the synesthesia. Like, I'm not seeing the same colors of the same image every time I hear the same song in a way. So I think like, in the end, I think everybody is able to associate visuals with music, especially when lyrics have like a great sense of imagery as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel that like observation, or almost kind of like letting the creative energy flow, is part of the songwriting process? Do you almost, basically to reword this question, do you feel like inspiration just tends to strike you, or do you go out looking for it?
That's a really good question. I'm more inclined to let it strike me, because I feel like if it's kind of like I try to be in the headspace. There are things that I do to get me into that headspace, but I can't just turn it on at will. There's just no way. Like if I'm in a particular mood, I might try to start working on something, and then inspiration might strike at any time in that session unexpectedly, and that's when I work the best. But it's not something I feel like I can just go after in that way, but there are steps I can take to make it easier for the inspiration to strike me, if that makes sense.
And you mentioned too the topic of change. I wanted to get back to that, because every artist wants to grow one way or another, and every artist wants to evolve, even though change is very scary and very difficult at times. Can you dictate your own evolution? Do you feel like you can make change sort of happen, or do you just kind of have to let it develop over time in a way? Like,
Again, it's like it's both, right? It's like you can consciously make changes and say, I want to go in this direction for this next album. Once you get there, your vision might not be realized in the way that you expected. And I think it's always good to allow the unexpected in when you're working on something, because when you do that, it makes for more of an authentic thing at the end.
does it always though? What if you do have like a real vision in a way? Like for instance, there are certain concept albums where every note was intended and they went over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and they didn't really like get too sidetracked or let different things sort of sideswipe the project. So do you think that there is also an essence of maybe not letting growth take your focus away, or something? Double-edged swords all around.
I don't know that I truly believe that that's possible. I feel like the creative process is so unpredictable, and even people that try to map everything out to a T and, have all the hired guns there doing everything note for note, there's always room for change. And I think the people that do it the best will allow for that spontaneity, because I think that spontaneity is important, no matter how unspontaneous you try to be, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. And because, discomfort is the most important aspect of growth. Like, you need to be uncomfortable to grow. Do you think that some people, they use the idea of art being stress relieving and maybe like there's sort of like escapism? Do you think that maybe that's utilized too much, because then when it becomes sort of, they kind of develop a comfort zone in a way? Like, do maybe like people find too much comfort in their passion, and therefore there is no growth that's achieved?
I think there's different degrees of that and different kinds of it. Like, there are people bands I know, for instance, that they just put out the same record like year after year, and that's cool and that works for them and that's comfortable. They have their audience, they know what their audience wants, and they keep delivering on that. I think it's like hard to determine how, because it's like there's different types of comfort. Like, you can be comfortable doing your formulaic approach that you've been doing for years. It could be sort of split up in different ways. Like, maybe like 90% of it is the old way, but you're allowing like 10% of a change or a difference or something like that. I would say the vast majority of people do it that way. Like, there's always something maybe slightly different. And then there are people that want to change it more and keep only a little bit of the old stuff, just to be able to have a connection from album to album and not alienate their fans too much, maybe. And there are people that just don't give a shit. They'll do something completely different.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of people who are like into art, like people who actively seek it out and are always scoping out underground stuff and get really into it, I think like a lot of people are just going to listen to your music and assume it's that there's concept albums, because of the very sort of like artistic aspect behind it in a way. So I think in the end there is always sort of like messaging behind it, but you tend to like leave it more abstract at the same time as well, right?
Yeah, I always like to leave room for interpretation by the listener, like, however, because that's when we listen to music, we connect to it personally, and we connect to it personally in so many different ways. So the more room you can leave to make that interpretation a different thing, the more connected I think the individual will feel to it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. There are people though who do love to get invested into like if a listener were to come up to you at a show and asks you, what does this sort of mean? What were you trying to say? Are you going to just say it's whatever you want it to be, or will you like actually like explain it? Because I've seen artists do both, and I am wondering what the right way. I've gotten both answers, and I'm curious to what the right way is.
Yeah, I don't think there is a right way. I would I always give a little bit of me and where I came from when I made the album. I try not to get too explicit about like what all the song lyrics mean, what all the concepts are, just to leave that wiggle room for people to bond to it differently. But I think it's also fun for the listener to know where I came from and what what it all means to me and how it came out of me,
Yeah.
but without over interpreting it.
Yeah, I mean, because in the end, it is still a piece of you that you are putting out there, and people are getting that piece of you. They want to know what that piece entails, but at the same time, that one piece can only say so much.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
and the final question I wanted to ask you is do you want every album? I've always said that art is life in and of itself. That is something. Like when I first interviewed you during the Ayana 4 album cycle, that was for me during a big artistic exploration in my life. I literally had dozens of paintings on the floor underneath my feet while we were doing that interview. And like,
Oh.
do you believe that like when you create art, that it could evolve over time as more people interpret it, more people experience it, grow past that art? Or do you think that it should just represent that one moment in time? You want to keep Insomnia and Diminution in 2018, and for example?
Not at all. Like the beauty of having this great back catalog is you can go back to it as a totally different person, right? In this time period than it meant to you when you listened to it the first time. And that's a great experience because it can almost feel like listening to a different album. Like I love doing that because like I'll go back and listen to my early work and I'm like, this sounds nothing like it did to me when I was first making it. And because you've had some distance and things mean differently, like things have different meanings when you listen to it, as you get older and you have other experiences and you see how things connect over time. That's a really wonderful thing. Like I don't like in a way it is a snapshot of who I was at that time, but I love that the impressions can change as you go back to them from time to time to time.
Yeah, and like music is the perfect example of how time is relative too. Like we're all late bloomers with like a lot of the bands we listen to. Like I'll try to think of like a good example. I'll give like the most basic like example, right? Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction came out a decade before I was born. So it doesn't take me back to 1983. It takes me back to 2007 when I started getting into rock and roll. You know what I mean? So like that's I think a good example of how like music shows that time is relative and everybody has different experiences and different memories associated with it.
Absolutely. Good example.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for continuing to deliver new music, and thank you as always for an amazing and enlightening and inspiring conversation. Is there just anything else with the release of your new work that you'd like to promote? I know you are coming to Brooklyn very soon. I have that show marked in my calendar. So
Awesome. Yeah, it'll be great to see you there if you can make it out.
I have to see you perform. I've been listening to your albums for like since I first discovered Diminution in 2018. I was, you were a fan. I became a fan of your music and an artist that I admired from doing interviews. You're one of the heavy New York era artists, as I call.
Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, that lineup is stacked. It's December 18th at the Heart Bar in Bushwick, and it's me and Grid Failure. I'm going to do collab with Grid Failure, Compactor, and Ryan from Ayana 4's new duo project, Taxes, is going to be opening.
Can we sneak in? Can we sneak in an Ayana 4 song somewhere in one of the sets, maybe, or?
I might have Ryan join me on some stuff, so you never know. We're pretty unpredictable when we get together.
Yeah, but you and Grid Failure, and a shout out to the other bands as well. But you and Grid Failure, that's going to be a visual experience. I'm going to feel, and I've never been to this venue either, so I'm excited to see a new spot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Leila Abdul-Rauf. Be sure to check out the brand new album. It is absolutely kick-ass. It calls From a Seething Edge. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.